Hey, folks, we are live as promised. And we are with Anthony Sammarco, who recently comes back to us from Italy. Is that the Amalfi Coast? Is that what you call your trip?
Exactly. The Amalfi Coast, based in Sorrento.
Okay, so Anthony is. Do you mind if I refer to you as a bon vivant? Is that how you say
Oh,
it?
my. How impressive. I'll take anything, but thank you.
Well, I looked that up, and that's a person who's very sociable and lives a luxurious lifestyle.
Oh, my. Well, I can only aspire.
So Anthony's back. The last time I believe we spoke, he was talking with us about his new book called The Other Red Line, and it was about Boston's combat zone. But since that time, a long-awaited journey to Italy with a group of his fans, well, a group of friends and fans. Uh, it happens, and we're going to hear about it now. So this is super exciting. We have some photos, some very nice photos that we will share if everything goes right. We're currently going out live to YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook, which is kind of a fun use of the technology. And we're so happy to have Anthony with us. And my first question, I guess my first question is about COVID, because I'm thinking about going to Rome, and I'm curious about the restrictions now. For example, do you need to have a test before you leave? And do you need to have a test in order to return? And where do you get the test to return? At the airport? Maybe you on your trip in your group had different rules because you were in a group. Can we find out about that?
Sure. Well, the thing is, this trip was planned with Durgan Travel. Durgan is a travel agency out of Stoneham, Massachusetts. They're wonderful. I've traveled with them previously. I've gone to Prague, I've gone to Budapest, Vienna, Portugal, Italy. I think one of the things is, however, what I did was to arrange it in such a way that we did certain things that interested me and I hoped would interest others. And I put this out to not only family, but friends on Facebook. And we had a 20 limit, which was perfect. And in that instance, we were to travel, of course, during the hindsight of COVID. Now, of course, with COVID and the third inoculation, it's a little bit concerning. But we were told that we had to get an inoculation 48 hours, not an inoculation, I shouldn't say that. We had to get a test to provide that we were actually negative. We went to urgent care. It was $125 and it was provided immediately. So we had to carry that. But you also have to carry your original of the COVID inoculations, not a copy, though it's important to put a copy into your suitcases as well as maybe on your phone or tablet. Every time we looked at this, it was reassuring people that this was to be done. There was a little confusion. Sometimes people said 72 hours, others said 48 hours, but we did it actually the 48 hours, and that was perfect. When we got to the airport and we were flying British Airways to London.
Can I ask a question? It's time sensitive. Did you get this test as a group prior to going or individually?
No, it was all individually going. On the way back, it was by a group.
Okay.
But because we were flying British Airways and we were landing at Heathrow in London, though we were not leaving the airport, we actually had a little bit of difficulty because British Airways has a form that has to be completed on a tab or a computer that actually shows that not only you have all your inoculations, but it also has everything from your name, your passport, address to where you are flying, as well as incidental information. It was 4 pages. It was daunting. And anytime you might have made a mistake, you had to start over. And that was something that, granted, we did accomplish. We flew, and the thing was, when we flew to Logan, from Logan to Heathrow, it was fun. We waited 2 hours, a layover, and then we flew to Italy. But between the time that we were at Heathrow, going through different passes, we had to show all of our paperwork as well as our passport to provide documentary proof of who we were. But when we got to Italy at Fiumicino, it was something that was just incredible. I must have provided all of this paperwork at least 4 times. So they're taking the COVID situation very seriously. Masks were required. The only time we didn't wear our mask was when we were eating on the airplane. But the whole concept here was once we were in Rome, we traveled by bus to Sorrento, 4 hours. because Alitalia had actually canceled our tickets previously, they were anticipating going out of business. So the whole concept was it was 24 hours of flying. It was a little bit of travail simply for the fact, was this test, going to be accepted? Was it the PCP? Was it the 24 hours or the rapid test? So, and I think in a lot of ways, what you have to do is be very, very careful reading everything you can, because different airlines, different countries have different situations. But we got to Italy and I breathed a sigh of relief. But the idea is, in this instance, this tour itself was something that, people realize we haven't really traveled in 2 years. So what were we doing, and how could we not only remain safe, but in that instance, as a bubble of 20 people, also realize that within a day or two that we at least could take our masks off on our individual bus and enjoy. And we did enjoy. It was wonderful.
Okay. Now tell me about the trip.
Well, the trip was something that I helped to plan. I was really kind of intrigued. I retired in May. I think in some ways I'm still going to continue to teach at Boston University. But by retiring, not only am I busier now than I was working an 8-hour day, I think in some ways I also wanted to become maybe a tour guide in retirement. And because Durgan had always offered these incentives that they could tailor a tour directly to your needs or desires, I thought, why not work with them? Well, I did. And Annette Wood, who is the president of Durgan Travel, is a wonderful person. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to stay in one hotel. There's nothing worse than traveling and going from hotel to hotel, from city to city. I think in a lot of ways, I don't carry tremendous amounts of clothes. I try to bring some more formal things for the evening and a blazer, but I lived in shorts and a polo shirt. And when we did arrive, the hotel, which was the Michelangelo in Sorrento, was not only a 4-star, but it was wonderful. The food was incredible. The breakfasts were just wonderful. And I think one of the concepts is these day trips, such as to Capri, to Istria, to Avellino, which is where my paternal grandmother's parents had come from. We came from a little village called Montefalcano, which is within Avellino. And we went to Avellino and we had a wonderful luncheon at a winery. One of the things about this trip was the food, even at lunch, as we actually went on a daily basis on a trip, were incredible. One was to a water buffalo factory where they actually not only took care of these water buffaloes as if they were pets, but they provided the finest buffulo, which is a cheese, in all of the Rome area. And many of the people themselves were just simply arriving at this place when we went for our tour just to buy the cheese. So I think in some ways, not only the wineries providing some incredible wines, but luncheons that went the gamut from not only pasta as well as buffalo cheese, buffulo, but also on Capri and Istria from things such as fresh calamari, fresh prawns, fresh shrimp, fresh lobster, all things from the sea that had just been caught that morning. So I hoped in some ways that this group would meld, and we did. It was just fantastic. But the food and the wine and 80-degree sunny weather, not even an overcast or rainy day in any of the 10 days, was something that was not only fun, but it was something in a lot of ways that has now gave me the impetus to actually start planning a trip to Sicily next year.
Well, I need to talk to you about that. But first, you've been a lot of places, but there's something about Italy that pops. It's something unnameable, which I'll ask you now to go ahead and name. What is it about Italy what is that feeling, and what causes that feeling?
I'm going to use a French term, and it's basically the joie de vivre. These people know not only how to live, but they know how to eat, they know how to drink wine, but they also know in some ways to make people who are tourists welcome. And welcome was something that we got on a tremendous basis. Every time we went around, I mean, many of us had questions about various things. We even visited a prison in Montefiore, which is in Avellino. What would you think a prison could possibly be? But it was one of the most fascinating things that I'd actually visited. But these people went out of their way. Some did not speak English, and we had a translator. Cinzia was her name, and she was a dynamo. She really was the most charming woman. And I think one of the concepts is that, you can be a tourist and you can stand there and listen. But I think one of the things my group did was not only to listen, but to ask some very intelligent questions. And also, I created a Facebook page just for the group to share ideas, share comments. What was the wine? How did you enjoy it? What was the luncheon like? Did you enjoy it? And I think one of the concepts is all of this will be shared with Durgan because it could be a set tour, who knows? But I think one of the things I love about Italy is the fact that I'm never disappointed. I always feel in some ways I find something new, I learn something new, but I also realize that with ancient antiquities as well as modern day Italy, they seem to live side by side. And it's a really wonderful feeling to actually immerse myself in a culture from which I descend.
You talked about joie de vivre. Another aspect of that is, and it's something you didn't mention, they know how to dress. They can put different combinations of suit and tie together that blow me away. You can just sit in a Duomo in Milan and be staggered by how cool they dress.
Well, you're very right, because in a lot of ways, Joe and I actually had a blue blazer, which is our regimental uniform here in Boston. But I had purchased over the summer a magnificent, almost ecru beige silk blazer made in Italy. And it was really very nice. And Joe had a blue silk blazer. So we felt as though we had held our own. But of course, you're right. People did dress. On the Sunday prior to coming home, which was a day where we went to the church in Sorrento, it was not only a wonderful day, sunny and warm, but it was just a very interesting interpretation of the Roman Catholic Mass. But afterwards, we went over to the piazza and we sat and we ordered a drink, which was around noontime, and pizza and a few little crudités and things of that sort. And as we continued to eat, many of our tour guide members began to gravitate to us. So by the end of the lunch at 2:30, there must have been 10 or 12 of us. But as we watched people pass by, we saw 3 different weddings. The brides were just incredible. But you began to realize not only the members of the wedding party were beautifully dressed, but people just walking before their lunch were just incredibly dressed. Even the children were turned out so well. So you're right. Italians do seem to actually have a higher sense of fashion than many of us here in Boston with blue blazers and rep ties.
So now tell us a little bit about the daily destinations that you visited.
Well, this was the thing. I wanted something that was a little bit unusual. Durgan does offer various trips all over Europe, as well as cruises. But Durgan was someone who, in some ways, had specific Italian trips, the Grand Tour, as well as Sicily, or, they did have a Sorrento tour. But what I wanted to do was to actually go to places such as Capri, which also has Anna Capri, which is at the very top of Capri. Sea urchins, and I have to say it really was sea urchins. But we were someone that sat there and had plate after plate of pasta with seafood, and then seafood itself, such as calamari and shrimp, as well as even lobster. But we also would have a wonderful wine, which was the Sammarco wine. And many people don't realize in some instances, I have a very distant cousin, Ettore Sammarco. I guess he would be basically like a 6th or a 7th cousin once removed, who actually has a winery in Avellino. And you realize in some ways there are many, many vineyards in the area, but we were served the Sammarco wine, which was really kind of fun to see the reaction of the people on the tour.
In a little while, we'll see a bottle of that wine.
You'll also see a person who has a little bit of a pasty face and a little bit of disheveled hair after having drunk 4 glasses. But we went to Capri too, and Capri is something in a lot of ways that is kind of a fashionable island. I mean, people flock to Capri because of designer clothing, designer jewelry, and some of the most fashionable hotels imaginable. But one of the things is when we went, we took a ride to Ischia Porto, which Ischia Porto is adjacent to Capri. We actually saw in some ways not only a castle where families still live, but we also began to realize that one of the places was a garden called La Motella. La Motella was the garden of Sir William Wallace and Lady Wallace. He was a British composer. I'd heard of his works. I really was not well aware of them, but they lived there and they created this garden that not only had an orchid garden, a banana garden, they had perennial gardens, evergreen gardens, Chinese gardens, and they overlooked the bay. So it wasn't just horticultural, and they lived there and they maintained this for years with a magnificent mansion. But then they created a foundation, and the Wallace Foundation still preserves it today as an intact garden that was actually, something that was not only developed, but it was something that you realized was something that many people would enjoy. Well, in that instance, not only was there sun, ocean, as well as gardens, but when we went to these places, the food was just incredible. And each luncheon was 3 courses. It was not a huge amount of food, but it was also very tasty and indicative of the culture and the environment.
Capri goes way, way back. Isn't that where Caligula was taken there to be tutored and learn how to do horrible things?
Oh, they weren't so horrible. Caligula, in some ways, I think, is a misrepresented emperor. He was somebody who was interested in the joys of life, if you can imagine. But in a lot of ways, you're right. There was this concept of not only the emperors and their families, but also the nobility of Rome summering on Capri. Capri is an island that actually has like a 45-degree angle to the top, which is called Anna Capri. Some of these houses are built on cliffs. You just can't imagine that they project from the stone of Capri, but they actually create these wonderful terraces, and the roads have hairpin turns. So if you can imagine a bus with 20 people taking hairpin turns to get the top of Anna Capri, you can imagine in some ways what it was really like. But there's a place in the very center at the top called Piazza Umberto, named for, of course, Umberto, the first king of the unified Italy. And it's an open area, beautiful, magnificent panoramic views, but it's also something that goes the gamut from a little bit of a honky-tonk experience of fried dough and limoncello and ice cream and gelato. But then around the corner, you have everything from Gucci and Bulgari, and you have the most wonderful couriers who actually create fashions that one can only imagine what they cost. But it was also something in some ways, they were interspersed with bed and breakfasts, luxury 5-star hotels, wonderful restaurants, and little piazza pizza places. So I like the whole concept of, people of all walks of life looking at this as something that, window shopping costs nothing. But on that instance, you began to realize how special a place it really was.
Are you ready to show some photos and talk about that?
By all means.
All right, let's try to make the sharing happen here. We did rehearse this, so let's go. Share screen. And share. But then I need to open the photos. There we go.
There we go. Well, the Amalfi Coast is something you begin to realize everyone talks about it. It's something that even if one hasn't been to Italy, you've heard of this not only panoramic and scenic drive, but the hairpin turns and curving roads. When I was speaking earlier about the houses built on the cliff, you can actually see here on the left-hand side, not only houses, but hotels. And look at the view. I mean, this harbor not only had small boats, which were real fishing boats that went out on a daily basis, but they also had yachts and sailing boats. This was something in a lot of ways that still maintained its traditions of the mercantile trade, the sea, not only providing fish and seafood, but it was also something the shellfish would be an important part of the diet on a daily basis. But it was so wonderful to actually see them bringing in their haul on a daily basis. And the buildings of churches, municipal buildings, and even markets selling them accordingly.
Which town is this?
This is Amalfi.
Okay. Now we move to the Sammarco wine.
Yes. So when we were in Istria and we actually sat to our lunch, it was really a lovely building. It not only had these wonderful barrel vaulted arches, which was actually a place where wine was kept in the 18th century, but it was recreated in this instance into a restaurant. And when wine of the Sammarco vineyard was actually served, it seemed everybody turned towards my table and wondered, was this something that had been planned? And it was. I mean, of course, Sammarco wine is something that we've actually served in my family, but we've served the red wine, especially with roast beef on Sundays. I'd never had the white wine, and it's a very difficult wine to obtain in this country. Normally, it was through Martignetti Liquors, and they are cousins of my father. But now I've come home and I've tried to actually secure at least a case of wine, and it's proved difficult. But it was really a wonderful, full-bodied white wine that actually was not only refreshing because it was served ice cold, but it was something, as you can see by my hair and face, I had actually had a bottle to myself.
Up in the corner, there are wooden boxes on a shelf up top. Are those cigars?
No, those are the wine cases for the Sammarco wine.
Oh, they're further away than I imagined. So
it was a reasonably priced wine. I think we paid 15 euros for an extra couple of bottles because I wanted people to basically enjoy it. But
right.
A bottle was usually provided at the table for 4 people. But like I say, I think it's very important to enjoy a fine wine, especially if it has your surname on it.
There you go. All right. Now, tell me about this.
Nice. Well, this was at the Bufalo factory. And one of the things about this trip was not only did our niece, but 2 of our great nieces, as well as many friends, went. And this is, starting on the left, Sharon Cayley and myself, Mary Tochi Reagan, and then Joe Cedrone. Sharon and Mary serve on my board of the Brighton branch Boston Public Library, and I've known them for years. Mary and Joe grew up together in Bugs Village in Brighton. So this was something that was a very special trip because it was not only family and friends, but other people that I've actually chatted with on Facebook. So here we were having coffee and ice cream after having had a wonderful lunch under a pergola, within sound of the water buffalo mooing as they were milked.
I love these photos and your stories. And now we have another shot. It looks like this is the other side. Is this?
This is Capri.
Okay.
And this is Capri. And you can see, remember I mentioned it was a 45-degree angle as it rose from the ocean to Anacapri? Mm-hmm. Well, as you can see here, it's not only volcanic rock. Remember, Mount Vesuvius is one of the many volcanoes, but the whole concept is this petrified rock is something that was created during the ice ages, but Capri was built primarily on rock, and it's in terraces as it ascends to the hill. Capri is terribly expensive. Many of the hotels themselves are anywhere from $500 to $700 a night just for a standard room, but the views are incredible. The wines are wonderful. It's a real concept of not only living there, and many people do, And of course, tourism is a huge part of the economy. But as you can see in the foreground, not all of these are luxury yachts. Many of them are actually fishing boats. So the tourism is important because all of the incidentals that go towards supporting tourism are still alive and active. And this was something that was really quite incredible.
And looks like a fun lunch here.
This was at Torrisi Wine in Avellino. And as I said, my paternal grandmother's parents, Giovanni and Lucia Peranti Gianelli, had come from Avellino, the little village of Montefalcone. But this was a little village that actually had this enormous winery. I mean, it was enormous. And the man who ran it, Torrisi, Mario Torrisi, was somebody who not only created a very good wine beginning in the 1980s, but he encourages people to come and have a luncheon to sample the various wines. Well, this was something that was really quite an impressive aspect. And we realized in some ways that this not only provided a delicious, delicious wine, but we also had views from this pergola looking to the left of the Apennine Mountains. Now, in that instance, you began to realize that not only were we served, and this sounds incredible, bacala balls. And bacala is a dried cod, but it was mixed with potatoes and a little bit of breadcrumbs and fried. But then we were served a fresh pasta. We were also served in some ways with things such as not only the most delicious fried bread, but then we also had a little bit of a beef dish. They called it a barbecue, but it was a piece of pork, but it wasn't barbecue sauce as we know it, but Italian style with potatoes. And then the most delicious dessert, which was simply a fruit tart. But during that period, they were very free with the wine. And Torrisi wine is still available, not only locally to actually enjoy, but it's available in this country. I did check one of our suppliers here on the Cape, and they have it. So tomorrow I'm having dinner guests, and we're serving Torrisi Chianti wine. So it's quite fun.
The woman in the white shirt in the foreground has a plate in front of her with
Yes.
It looks like patties. Are those the bacala?
No, she is a vegan, and those were actually fried mozzarella patties,
Okay.
along with fresh tomatoes from the garden. So say they serve a salad. It's not a salad they prepare from a supermarket. They pick the endive and radicchio and all sorts of things, as well as tomatoes and cucumbers right on the property. Remember, these things not only have cheese, but they also are something that they provide for vegans or basically diabetics or things of that sort. But you can see how many people actually enjoyed the wine. It was quite fun.
That's a wonderful picture of folks enjoying themselves. Now we have people in jail.
Yes, unfortunately. Well, this jail was something that I really enjoyed. It was in Avellino in a little village called Montefiore. And Montefiore is almost something that's preserved in the 19th century. People still live there, of course, but it's something in some ways that when you stand on this village square, you overlook vineyards which simply cascade on either side. Now, the prison, which had been used since the 17th century, had not only some interesting history, but they also showed in a lot of ways how people were basically tortured. And the sad thing was, it might have been simply the fact you defaulted on your taxes and you were considered a debtor. You might actually be tortured. And they actually had these areas where people might actually stay for years before they could actually pay their fine. It was a pretty sad situation, but within that prison, they had not only great examples of lace making in Avellino, and they had magnificent dresses and collars, as well as cuffs that many women would have made, but they had displays of how these women would do the embroidery as well as the lace making on lace bobbins. But when I saw this, I said to the tour guide, Jincia, would you please take a photograph of us from the other side? And of course, you can see here not only the metal bars, but we were in prison. I told somebody, come and bail us out, but bring wine. We hadn't had lunch yet. but it was something that was kind of fun and it was a little bit different. So we really did. I tell you, every day it was 8 in the morning until 6 at night. And you begin to realize 10 hours is a tremendous amount of time, but we stopped for various coffee breaks, we stopped for lunch, and then we'd stop again for another coffee break in the afternoon before we came back to change for dinner. It was quite fun.
A food-related question. You speak of buffalo cheese. Is that mozzarella?
It's a mozzarella made from the milk of the buffalo, the water buffalo that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
And the water buffalo seems to be one of the major cheeses, but it's one of the finest. It's made purportedly in Italy. We usually have mozzarella made from milk, which is from a cow, but you can get buffalo cheese. It's a little more expensive, but you can get it in Boston.
I want some now. Okay, what do we have here?
Well, you're looking at the concept of what Italy has become. On the left-hand side, you have an area that has the old village along with the church. But on the right-hand side, the area in and around Sorrento not only has large numbers of people, but you also have new buildings. Now, Italy has a very large population. It's a small peninsula projecting into the harbor of in Sorrento, the Bay of Naples. But you realize that many people live in high-rise apartment buildings, and these probably date to the 1970s, 1980s. But in the foreground, here you have this area that could be a winery, it could be olive groves, or it could simply be vegetable gardens. But between the old section, the new section, and the foreground, which is what it was probably like since time immemorial, people began to realize that Campania, which is this region of Italy, really doesn't differ. The only thing you don't see here is water, but it is actually on the left-hand side. But that whole concept is, this is what Campania is all about, of which Sorrento is one of the major tourist attractions, but also one of the most lovely places to visit.
Did you spend any time at Vesuvius?
We had our barbecue, so to speak, at Vesuvius, at Torrisi Wine, which was on the slopes of Vesuvius. And though they had actually said to me it was going to be a barbecue, I really and truly thought it would be a barbecue of, probably spare ribs and steaks and things of that sort. But we had a lovely piece of pork. It was nowhere near the size that I thought it was going to be, but it was really more than filling. But the idea was we were supposed to climb to the top of Vesuvius. Unfortunately, there was a glitch. The tickets themselves were dated and the time, and we were just after our entrance, and they didn't let us in. So we basically did not travel to the top of Vesuvius. I was hoping to throw in somebody, but nobody wanted to volunteer.
I had an event happen to me at Vesuvius, but since when I speak, I get a feedback. I'm not going to torture folks by speaking much. I'll let you do most of the speaking. I'll share that story another time. Sure. We have the buffalo here.
Yes, these are the water buffalo. And this is something you can't imagine what the aroma, as I might say, is in this barn. It's an open air barn. They're actually treated like pets. They all have their individual little stalls. They have not only a place where they are fed, as you see here in the foreground, all sorts of grain and feed, but they also have massaging machines. And these water buffalo would simply walk up to the massaging booths, and the thing would go on the sides of not only their heads, but their necks and backs. And then after they were massaged, they would go one by one into their individual milking stalls, which was done electronically. And the buffalo milk would then be milked, and they would then make the buffalo cheese. Well, in a lot of ways, I kept looking at these cows. They must have seen thousands of people on a weekly basis. But this was something that was really quite interesting, and it's done very scientifically. They never buy water buffalo. This is actually a place where they breed the buffalo, And you can imagine that even the babies themselves have to be milked, but it's something that actually has only arisen in the last 35 to 40 years, but it's become one of the biggest employers in and around that area. And it's something that you realize it's not just a buffalo milk cheese, but that almost everyone that we saw going in that didn't have lunch were buying these boxes of buffalo cheese. And it was fairly expensive, but they show you the men through the window making the different cheeses, how they water it in salt water, and then they create the individual balls. We can usually buy these balls in Italian American markets, both in Boston and Providence, Rhode Island. But these water buffaloes, they seem to have a little bit of a personality. And there was one that I called Maisie. I was up above on the balcony looking down, and she looked at me the entire time I was there. And I thought, gee, do I have horns coming out of my head? But it was really kind of fun, and the lunch was delicious.
Why did you call her Maisie?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, when I lived in Milton, there was a cow that actually was painted by Thomas Hughes Hinckley. And in a lot of ways, I always called her Maisie. And the idea was that I guess a cow sounds pretty interesting with the name Maisie, but I think in a lot of ways, she seemed to be a Maisie to me.
Okay. Had to ask. All right.
Now, here's Mount Vesuvius. Now, Mount Vesuvius is something that has erupted many times. 79 AD was when actually Mount Vesuvius erupted and destroyed not only Pompeii, but Herculaneum. One of the things is, one of the most recent eruptions that was tremendous was in 1940s, when it actually would see the molten lava coming down and destroying parts of the village. Well, it's said that over 5 million people live within a 5-mile distance of Vesuvius in any direction. It is a little bit of a concern. They monitor it on a daily basis. But the whole concept is this molten lava has actually mixed with the soil to create this volcanic soil. Now, Joe and I make our own, well, people call it tomato sauce. I call it gravy. But we make our own from San Marzano tomatoes that are imported from Italy. Now, I go to Demoulas Market. I buy them in these enormous cans. I think it's 6 pounds. And we keep them, basically until we use them. And we eat a lot of it. So I must have a dozen 6-pound cans in storage. But in that instance, those tomatoes can only be certified as San Marzano tomatoes if they're grown in volcanic soil from Vesuvius. Sounds really peculiar, but in the foreground, you can see on the right-hand side one of the roads, as well as this enormous panoramic view of all of the villages in and around Sorrento. It was really incredible. And as you can see, the days, there might be clouds in the sky, but it was 80 degrees and sunny, perfect weather, no rain whatsoever. It was really warmer than our Indian summers. So we were very, very happy and very lucky to have the weather.
All right. Oh, look, this must be a niece.
It is. This is our great niece, Megan Corbett. And she, along with her sister Jessica and her mother, our niece Angela, would all come. And in a lot of ways, it was wonderful because even though we had 20 people, we had 3 tables wherever we would eat, except for the long tables at lunch. And we would constantly move between tables. We were always the first at breakfast and usually the first at dinner. So the tables themselves would seat probably 6 people. And Megan would actually sit. She's employed by Fidelity Investments, and she's not only fluent in Japanese, but she also is somebody in a lot of ways that has Italian blood. Her family came from San Donato Valdocamino in Frosinone. And I think in that instance, she was somebody who had always wanted to go to Pompeii. And on our free day, she actually, with her mother and sister and a couple of other women, went on the bus to Pompeii and spent the entire day. But it was really fun to meet people in a different context rather than just basically a family dinner or a coffee or something of that sort. It was a type of a thing that the 20 people really did meld, and it was a great tour group.
Is it just me, or is her smile identical to yours? She looks.
I wish she's not my blood great niece, but she's Joe's blood great niece. But I think we were both happy to be with one another.
All right. Now we go to paradise.
This is La Mortella. These are the gardens of Sir William Wallace and Lady Wallace. Now, Lady Wallace had actually commissioned Russell Page. Now, Russell Page was a major landscape architect. He was British, but he was somebody who created gardens in the mid 20th century and utilized water features as well as varieties of plantings. And you can see here, this is a water garden. You have not only water pad lilies, you have lilies themselves, you have tropical trees and palms, but she used water features for fountains, rills that would actually go for at least 400 feet and then end in a pool. But she created things such as orchid gardens, aviary gardens, and of course, specific gardens themselves, not just to Italy, but even things that had Chinese influence. And Lady Wallace, though she was much younger than her husband, would survive until the 1970s. And these gardens were maintained by dozens of gardeners. You can imagine Istria having a tropical climate, of course, at least 9 to 10 months out of the year. And even in the winter, it was warmer than our temperatures here in Boston. But what she did was to preserve it. And the Wallace Foundation itself now, of course, encourages people to come to visit La Mortella. And of course, it's a wonderful walk through rooms of a garden. And of course, this is something that you begin to realize that as you leave one area, you go to another, and they're all beautifully planted. Really quite an incredible experience. We spent the afternoon there.
I went. Tell me about the lemons.
Well, lemons are one of the biggest things for tourists. You begin to realize that Amalfi itself is a place where lemons simply grow in trees in the streets as well as oranges. But there are lemons the size of a football. And in many instances, those are used, for a variety of purposes, including limoncello. But lemons are used not only in veal and chicken dishes, but you realize it's not only in desserts, but they make it into ceramics. Now, we did send back some different things because Joe's name was Citrone, which means, of course, citron. And his coat of arms actually has an uprooted citrus tree because it was purported they came from France to Italy. But in this instance, we use lemons for decoration in the summer at our house in Alsterville. And here you can see plates in the foreground at the bottom that are just like the ones we use for our kitchen plates in the summer. But you also have these topiaries and wall hangings of all sorts of lemon. Even though they're ceramic, when you stand there, the aroma of citrus is just incredible because just outside the door will not only be citrus trees, but there'll be various vegetable stands that will have small lemons as well as the large lemons. And they're used every day by the people. I mean, lemon is delicious unless you have an affinity for something else. But my idea is that lemon is something that's not only refreshing, but it was wonderful in my gin and tonics.
Okay. I'm going to mute your mic and see what happens. Check 1, 2. Don't leave, Anthony, but I wanted to talk a little bit, and muting your mic takes away that garbledness. I'll get right back to you. So Anthony Sammarco, this is Anthony Sammarco, who is a good friend of mine, and he's been a guest many times on the radio show and beyond. He has recently gone to the Amalfi Coast and brought a group there, and that's what he talked about today. In addition, he recently finished and published a book, The Other Red Line, which is available. And he may have published more books since then. After I unmute his mic, he can talk about that. And Anthony, Barton wants to know if you are going to be speaking at or doing any book signings soon. So let me unmute you. There you go.
Oh, thank you. Well, let me look at the calendar. It's so funny. I have one today, which is at Laurentide, which is in Mashpee, but it's a private lecture. Next Tuesday, I'm giving a walking tour at the Milton Cemetery in Milton, Massachusetts at 5 p.m. On Thursday, the 14th, I'm at the Stoneham Historical Society speaking about molasses from the slave trade to the Great Flood of 1919. Then I have a few other lectures that are all private, but one of the things is I'll be online for the Barnstable Senior Center on Wednesday, October 27th at 1 p.m. It's on the history of the Baker Chocolate Company, and you can actually Google Barnstable Senior Center and you can actually register for it. It's free. I am lecturing tremendously, and if you check Facebook with my name, Anthony Sammarco, you'll see wherever I am. I can post the things that are free and open to the public. A lot of things I do are for clubs and retirement communities and various other facilities that aren't open to the public. But while you said about the other red line, which actually made #1 on the Amazon list, I was quite shocked. I dedicated that to Bradley J. Our wonderful evenings from midnight to 2 a.m. I still actually am tired from thinking about it. But I've also finished a book on Mission Hill through time, Mattapan through time, and right now I'm editing a book on Valentine's Day traditions in Boston. I've just finished a new book on Halloween traditions in Boston, but that will not be out until next fall. So I think in some ways, COVID was a time when we couldn't travel. Of course, we still, maybe you like I, would go onto YouTube and still travel by television. I always enjoyed it. But this trip was something that was really quite special, and I hope to recreate something that will be in Sicily in September or October of 2022. In some ways, I always appreciate Bradley J. asking me to come onto this wonderful show, sharing a little bit of my experience, but also meeting his wonderful viewers. So thank you, Bradley.
You're very welcome. And I'm going to mute you again there while I kind of say goodbye. Thank you. You'll be able to go to Anthony's Facebook page, and that's where you'll be able to find out where to hear him speak, maybe where to even meet him. It's fun for me to go to local stores. I think CVS, among others, at least CVS, I think. You can see his books on a rack there. It's one of those rotating racks, which must be fun for you, Anthony, to see. That would be so great. You can also get them on Amazon. Tonight, and I'm saying this to mostly remind myself not to forget, is I'm going to be on WBZ, Anthony, with Morgan White Jr. That'll be the first time I've been on those airwaves since just before COVID. And I just finished a video of this really nice Boston market in downtown Crossing called the Downtown Boston Arts Market. Very short video that I'll be posting, and that'll be on Bradley J's Boston, and I'll put it up on the travel, Bradley J Travel as well. I'd love it if you would subscribe to those YouTube pages. And Anthony, thank you so much for your time and your stories and your photos.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone. Have a great day, Anthony.